So as we go over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about faith. We're going to be talking about action. We're going to be talking about sacrifice. We're going to be talking about blessing. We're going to be doing all these things. But I wanted to start off today with looking at the theme of our campaign, which is 5 and 2. And so if you are aware of the analogy, 5 and 2 stands for 5 loaves and 2 fish. And maybe you remember that account that took place in the Bible where Jesus fed the 5,000 and all he had was 5 loaves and 2 fish. And yet what happened was he was able to take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 men. And we're going to unpack that today. But God can do amazing things when we simply just give him what we have. And so we're going to do that. And one other example of that is that today you will notice as I get into my sermon, there are no sermon slides. So you're going to say, why, Pastor? Well, they're in Internet Neverland right now, somewhere traveling between my house and here. And so, on the one hand, I got to be honest. I was sitting down here. Maybe some of you saw me scrolling my phone and you're like, man, he's on social media. What's he doing? No, I'm not. I was trying to find my sermon slides. That's what it was. Trying to find them so that I could do this. So I'm asking God, truly, God, do much with little, because I'm offering you little right now. I'm used to having the little crutch of slides to direct you along. I don't have it. What I do have, though, is I have the Word of God. And I know God's going to act in spite of it. You got to pay attention more, because I'm not going to have something up on the screen right now. So we're going to get into it. So I'm going to ask you a question. What does it mean that something is impossible? What does that mean, something is impossible? Well, I love dictionaries. And the definition of impossible is incapable of being or of occurring. Incapable of being or of occurring, insuperably difficult. Don't you like that word? When's the last time you used the word insuperably? That came out of the collegiate dictionary. Clearly, I don't speak like a collegiate person. But insuperably difficult. That's the idea of impossible. Now, what is impossible for one person may not be impossible for somebody else, right? I mean, think about it. If you have a little kid, and you say, I want you to pick up that 100-pound weight. And that little kid comes up, and it may be impossible for that 3-year-old kid to lift that weight. And yet, as a full-grown adult, maybe not, maybe you, as a full-grown adult who lives at the gym, you could come over and pick up that 100-pound weight. What's impossible for the kid, because it's impossible, may not be impossible here. So you understand the analogy. What is impossible for one doesn't make it impossible for the other. But we do a lot of impossibilities. And I think the reason why is because we have very much a horizontal focus in life. We get very much horizontally focused on how we live our life. And even though just this morning I was doing a devotional thing and I was talking about worship, and even though every single day, every day, it says the earth pours forth speech, that I serve a God who created all of this, and all he did was speak it into existence. When I look at the greatness of everything that I see, it pours forth the idea that I serve a God who can do the impossible, and yet I so often miss that, and I stress about my finances. I see the God of the impossible, and I'm stressing over my finances. I see the God who can do anything, and I'm stressing over my relationships. I'm stressing over all these things because I forget about the God who can do immeasurably more than all I can ask or imagine, because I'm so focused on what I can do. I'm like the little kid who stares at the weight and says, I can't lift it. It's too much. It's too big. There's nothing I can do. And you know what? That may be right. But you're forgetting the God who can do so much more. So how often does the language of I can't creep into your vocabulary? How often does the language of it won't happen? It can't happen. It just doesn't work. It won't work out. How often does that sort of vocabulary come into your vocabulary in your life on a regular basis? Now, some of you are more like me. You're the optimists. I'm an eternal optimist. It's going to work. We're going to find a way. It's going to work. But even I, as the eternal optimist, can sometimes look at situations and go, it just won't work. I just don't know how it's going to happen. And I have to go back and remember, with God, all things are possible. I have to remember that. So I want to set something for the record straight. I am not a health and wealth preacher. So I'm going to say it to the camera for all of you listening online. I am not a health and wealth preacher. I do not believe that you came today because God wants to give you a blessing. And if you only give to the 5 and 2 campaign, today is your day when God is going to just blow the doors off your bank account. You make a pledge to us because I am the ticket here. If you don't, God's going to curse it too. You know it. Nope, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is with God, our not enough can be more than enough. With God, our not enough can be more than enough. So in case you're wondering what my main theme of today, I'd usually have a slide up there. It says, with Jesus, our not enough can be more than enough. So if you're taking notes, write that one down. You're going to need that one. With Jesus, our not enough can become more than enough. And so let's turn, because you're dying to get to this, to Mark chapter 6, please. Mark chapter 6. And I want you, if you can, to maybe if you have another bookmark or something, you can put it in John chapter 6, because we're going to flip a little bit. Here's the thing. The account of the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle other than the resurrection that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. Each one of the gospel writers would look at different things and they would have a different emphasis. And Matthew wanted to portray Christ as king. And so all the things that Jesus did that helped paint this picture of Christ as king, he wrote those. Mark was all about painting Jesus as the suffering servant. So the things that fit his narrative of the suffering servant, he wrote that. Luke was giving an orderly account. John wanted to make sure they understood Jesus is the Son of God. And so you have these different things that they were painting this picture to make sure we had a full picture of who Jesus is as the Messiah. And so, but interestingly enough, whether Matthew says Christ is king, whether Mark says suffering servant, whether Luke is the orderly account, whether John is Jesus is the Son of God, they all looked and said, I want to include it when Jesus fed the 5,000. Isn't that interesting? The only miracle that's there in all 4 other than the resurrection. And so we're going to go and we're going to look at Mark specifically, but we're also going to flip back and forth with John. And so in Mark chapter 6, verse 30, we start with this. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Okay, so we know the scene. Just as a little bit of background, the disciples had been sent out. The disciples had been sent out, and they had gone around, and he had sent them around to the different countryside and villages to preach. And he said, if you're going to go there, and if they receive you, give them a blessing. Preach to them, give them a blessing. If they don't receive you, knock the dust off your feet and go away, leave them alone. And so they went out and they went everywhere. And then they all came back and they had everything to talk about. It's like the kid who goes away to school and can't wait to get home and talk to mom and dad. Mom, this is what happened. Dad, this is what happened. And you can picture the disciples. Jesus, we have got to tell you what happened when we were out on the road trips. We got to tell you about this. And so Jesus is like, okay, let's talk. Well, all the people are around. What you talking about? What you talking about? I'm hearing what you're saying over there. And finally, the disciples, you can just picture they're annoyed. Jesus, what are we doing? Jesus says, come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's get into a boat. And it says they sailed away and they went over to the far shore. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. So they got in their little speedboat, turned on the motor, motored way across the lake to get to the other side, right? Well, it doesn't happen that way back before speedboats. So what do? They get in the boat and they row. And the people are like, I see you out there. They're like, come on, we just got to get away. We see you. All right, let's go follow them. Hey guys, we're going. Come on, let's just get to the other side. Nope, we're going to join you over there. And you can just picture the disciples are a bit annoyed. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them, it says. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them. We're not told what the disciples thought about this, but we are told that Jesus had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so the disciples said to him, "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late." Remember, they were by the town and they had gone to this place, and there's a couple different locations that some say, but either location that's talked about is pretty remote. And so the idea is, there's no Wendy's or McDonald's around. You can't go to other places. There's nothing that's there. And so it says, send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. Now, this is interesting to me. Who was hungry? Who was hungry? We're not really told, but it's interesting. Earlier there in Mark, what does it say? Verse 31, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat. Who's the they? The disciples. Mark seems to point out that the disciples that people were coming and going. There were so many things they didn't have a chance to eat. So Jesus is like, okay, let's go away. The implication is, you're hungry, let's go away, let's get some food. So the disciples are like, yeah, let's go get some food. Well, all this stuff is happening. Do you think it was kind of like this whole thing of, the disciples are like, man, I'm hungry. And Jesus is continuing to teach and preach over there. But I am starving over here. And so you can just picture one of them, says, okay, you go talk to them. No, you go talk to them. Hey, let's go tell them that the people are hungry. Let's go tell them that the people are hungry, because maybe then Jesus will stop preaching, so then we can eat, because we are starving over here. We're not really told what all happened. All we know is that the disciples have this idea. Hey, you know what? These people are hungry. Maybe we should feed them. In fact, Jesus identifies it in the John passage. He actually identifies it, and he sees the people, and they need to be fed. And yet he starts with preaching. He starts with giving them truth before giving them food. But this is where it goes on. Send them away, the disciples said, but he answered, you give them something to eat. Jesus says to the disciples, hey, you give them something to eat. So here we find out something. If you turn over to John chapter 6, we find out something right here. John 6, verse 5. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? You could picture it. He's like, hey, Philip, look at all these people. Where do you think we should feed these people? How do you think we're going to get food for all these people? And then verse 6 tells us, he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. I love this, because it's like he asks the disciples, hey guys, here's the problem. We need to feed these people. There is no food around here. Clearly there's nothing. We're in a desolate place, but I want you to do it. Now that seems very unfair of Jesus, right? I mean, why doesn't he say, hey guys, I know we got all these people, but watch the miracle that I'm going to do? I mean, that would have been better. That would have been nicer of Jesus. And yet what Jesus is doing is he's putting it back on them to say, hey, do you understand that you are not enough? Do you understand this? And so he asks this, and he gives them the test. And sure enough, they don't understand that they're being tested. They walk right into it. Because what we're going to find out here in just a second, they're starting to try to answer the questions. But he does it for a test. And so I'll ask you, how many of you are undergoing a test today? How many of you are right in the middle of a test? You see the situation, you realize it's beyond you. In fact, maybe there's plenty of reasons why you realize it's beyond you, but you're still sitting here going, I think Jesus means it's up to me. I think what he says is, hey, I've done all these good things for you. You should do this back for me. And so, God, I'm going to be a good servant here. And I know you have so many good things in store for me, but you know what? You've given me all this. I'm going to do it. And he's giving you a test to tell you, you can't do it. That marriage that you're trying to fix, that you think, God, I'm gonna do the right thing. I'm gonna make it right. I'm gonna make this thing better. The test is there to remind you, you can't do it. But instead, you're not realizing it's a test. And I love the fact that John did this, because John records that Jesus knew it was a test. But Mark and the others, they don't say this. All Jesus does is he asks the question, or he tells them, you give them something to eat. And so fill in your situation. You raise your kids. You fix your marriage. You get your finances right. And we hear this. But in reality, it's not me, it's we. I want you to understand that. That's the way God designed this life to be lived. It's not me, it's we. It's Jesus and me. I'm not meant to do this alone. But if I don't understand, maybe I'm being tested, I can begin to think, oh, maybe it is up to me. So here you have the test. By the way, that's point one, because I can't have it on the screen. The first one is the test. The second one is our truth. First one is the test. The second one is our truth. If you look at this, if you go back to Mark, verse 37, but he answered, you give them something to eat. There's the test. Number 2, they said to him, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many people were there? 5,000. And the text tells us there were 5,000 men, which means there was more than just 5,000 people there. There was 5,000. Some have said maybe 7,000 or 8,000. I probably would say 10,000, 15,000. I had a picture of 5,000 people in a crowd, and I was going to show you the picture of 5,000 people. That's a lot of people. But now multiply that by 2 times, 3 times, whatever. How much food would it take to feed 5,000 men? Now add teenagers in there. I mean, think about this for a second. How much food can a teenager eat? Oh, too much. A lot of food. So not only do we have 5,000 men, but we've got women, we've got teenagers, we've got children, we got all this. The disciples are looking at it going, you can just picture one of them got their calculator out like, okay, if we take X amount, 8 months' wages, and that's just giving them a morsel. The truth of the matter is, their truth was, we only have this much. When I look at what it takes this much, but all I have is this much, and that's what I want you to understand. There is the test. And the test is designed to remind us of our truth, the truth. And the truth of the matter is, you and I don't have enough. Remember, with Jesus, my not enough becomes more than enough. So I need to understand this. I don't have enough, and that's what Jesus wants to remind me of. So if you're sitting here today and you feel ashamed because you realize I can't forgive like I should. You realize I don't have the emotional energy to do this like I should. I don't have enough to do this. Don't sit here in shame going, oh God, I wish you would have made me a better Christian. Remember, it's not me, it's we. God knows you don't have enough. God knows you don't have enough money. God knows you don't have enough time. God knows you don't have enough emotional energy. God knows you don't have enough. And that's why Jesus came to indwell you, to do life with you, to be life for you. Does this make sense? So to say I don't have enough is exactly good theology. My not enough can become more than enough with Jesus Christ. And so there is the test. You feed them. The truth. I can't feed them. Then God's truth. I'm just going to read this to you. I would have put the verses, the references up there. But if you're taking notes, write this down. Jeremiah 32:17. please. I didn't say that right. Write this down, please. Jeremiah 32:17. Jeremiah was, if you know the situation of Jeremiah, the people of Israel had been overrun by the Babylonians. And Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet because he was so distraught at what was happening to his beloved people, the children of Israel, because God was judging them. And yet the reason why they were falling as a people wasn't because God wasn't enough. It was because God was judging them for what they had done. And so Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 32:17, he says this, sovereign Lord, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. You have made all of this. Clearly nothing is too hard for you. That was his declaration. And then God answers back in 10 verses later where he says this in Jeremiah 32:27. First one was 17, next one was 27, in which God responds back to Jeremiah and he says this, I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is anything too hard for me? Clearly no. If God can speak this world into existence, do you think he can handle 5 loaves and 2 fish? Absolutely. Luke 1:37. Luke 1:37. This is actually in the New Testament, and this is the chapter of Jesus going to be born. And the question was, can Jesus come, or can John the Baptist come from somebody who's too old? And the reply was, for nothing is impossible with God. I want to say that again. For nothing is impossible with God. Luke 18:27, the last one. Luke 18:27, Jesus replied, what is impossible with men is possible with God. Remember, what's impossible for a 3-year-old child to do with God? How hard is this? And so we have the test. You feed them. The truth. We don't have enough. God's truth. With God, anything is possible, and that now leads us to the lesson of faith. To the lesson of faith. So in case you're writing your points, point 1, the test. Point 2, your truth or our truth. Number 3 is God's truth. And then the 4th one is lesson in faith. And I love what happens here. Mark 6:38. How many loaves do you have? He asked. Well, go and see. What we don't find out is that in John is the only one who records that it was a little boy. John is the only author. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't tell us anything about this boy. But how many of you remember the boy who brought his lunch, right? How many of you remember that? It's because we love little kids, don't we? That's why we remember. But what happens? Did the disciples go out and steal the boy's lunch? I'm picturing the disciples going out, hey, we need some food. Hey, that kid's got something here. Bring that thing. I don't know what the disciples did. I don't know whether Jesus or whether the little boy came up and he said, Jesus, here's my lunch. We don't know what all happened. What we do know is somehow a boy had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and somehow they got to Jesus. Clearly, though, these people were unprepared because they go around the crowd. The picture is who's got what? I got nothing. I got nothing. All the one little boy. You could tell he was a Boy Scout, right? You could tell because he came prepared. But he brings his 5 loaves and his 2 fish, and they're like, but what is this? There's no way 5 loaves and 2 fish can feed all these people. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. Can you picture the disciples? They're like, okay, 5 loaves, 2 fish. All right, everybody, sit down. Sit down, lunch is coming. And they know they only brought 5 loaves and 2 fish. Was this an act of faith? Jesus doesn't tell them how he's going to do it. He doesn't tell them what's going to happen. He just tells them, I want you to go put them in groups of hundreds and 50s. And then tell them to sit down. And they sat down. Now you can picture the stomachs are rumbling. The people are already beginning to taste whatever is lunch. Maybe they're thinking Chick-fil-A this day. We don't know what they're thinking. They know something's coming. They believe it's going to be good, but the disciples are sitting there going, guys, I'm going to tell you, I don't know what you're going to get, but I'm just told you got to sit down. So sure enough, they sit down. And Jesus does what he does. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, which, by the way, that's a miracle in and of itself. Can you imagine the disciples trying to get all these people to sit down in groups of 100? Have you ever tried to direct people to do in a crowd? It don't work, does it? Either they're starving or this was a miracle, one of those two. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. Man, when I think about this, I want to know the how. That's what I want to know. We know that Jesus took the 5 loaves, and we know that he took the 2 fish, and it says he broke them. Did he keep breaking them? Like, just breaking them? You know, have you ever tried to take a paper and just keep folding it and folding it and folding it? Eventually, you run out of the ability to fold this thing. Did Jesus just keep breaking it? I want to know the how. But we're not told. Somehow, between Jesus praying, thanking God for this, somehow between doing that and the disciples passing it all out, did the loaf just keep growing as he was pulling off of it? Don't you want to know? Isn't that just like us? I want to know the formula. 5 and 2. Okay, all right, $5 and 2 quarters. That's the formula. 5 quarters and $2. That's the formula. I need to pray for 5 days and then act for 2 days. That's the formula, right? It's not about the formula. It's about the person. And so often we come to church looking for a principle, looking for a lesson, looking for something that's going to change my life. God, give me the formula. You see, if he gives the formula, we don't need him, do we? How many miracles involved 5 loaves and 2 fish? So when you think about this, it's like, do we need 5 loaves and 2 fish? Do we need a little boy? Do we need to sit down in groups of hundreds and fifties? Do we need green grass? Do we need to be in Israel? That's not the point. The point is, I gave God what I had, which was not enough, and he made it more than enough. Does this make sense? It's not about the how. You can't look at your situation and say, oh, I got it all figured out. This is what I need to do. That's not the way it works. I simply offer it back to him. And no matter what happens, I give it back to him. I got to tell a little story. This was really cool. So I bought a new computer. And my new computer has been a source of frustration. And I got it a little over a week ago, and I bought it, and I've needed one because my old computer, the keyboard's falling off of it, and the battery, I'm on my 3rd replacement battery, and it still has problems. It was due. Time was up on this sort of thing. So I get my new computer, and it works great as long as I keep it plugged in. If I unplug it, it freezes. So I called the company, and I was working through support, tech support, doing all this sort of stuff. And finally, they're like, you know what? I think you just need to replace it. I'm like, really? It's a new computer. So I called Best Buy. Sure enough, got 15 days to return it. So I go to Best Buy yesterday, and I'm like, God, I'm just so frustrated. Here's my computer. And the guy's like, all right. So then he goes and gets another one. And then he calls the manager over. And I was like, he says to the manager, he says, can we do this? And I'm thinking, don't. I know you can. I know you can, and I'm frustrated anyway. You better give me my computer. The new one, not my old one back. You better give me the new one. And he says, he comes over and he says, well, because the manager's like, yeah, we can do this. So he comes over and he hands me a piece of paper and he says, I just want you to know that last week when you bought it, it was this much money. But this week, it's actually on sale. And so I just want you to know, $200 will be going back in your card. He says, because your computer was broken, because you brought it in to get a new one, now I can give you that sale price. I'm like, isn't that like God? I mean, isn't that like God? What I thought was it had to be this, and I was frustrated, and God provides $200. Just like that. Did I ask, oh God, please when I go today, please take my computer and get me some money back? I just wanted a new computer. I would have been happy with just a new computer. And God says, I'm going to give you $200 back. With God, my not enough can be more than enough. I don't know what your story is. I don't know what your situation is. I don't know what your setting is, but I will tell you right now, all of us here, we have these things where we're looking, we're saying, do I have enough to do what it takes? Do I have enough? I'm here to tell you, you don't. And that's the best news ever. Because when we take our focus off of what we have to offer, what emotional strength we have, what spirituality we have, whatever it is, when I take that and I say, God, only you can do this. When I do that, that's when God says, okay, now watch what I can do. And so here is normally where I would put the theme back up again. With Jesus, my not enough can be more than enough. But don't forget the first two words, with Jesus. As we stare at our capital campaign, I get it. Recession is looming or here. We're not sure. It depends on who you listen to. Lord, what are you doing here? Now's not good timing from the world's perspective. And Jesus says, okay, with me, your not enough is going to be more than enough. I'm looking at this thing going, okay, Lord, it's not just about the campaign. We're looking at our regular budget because whatever happens with the campaign, it's over and above what we normally do. So you can't just look at what you normally give to the church and be able to say, okay, here's what it is. You can't just say, well, I'll just change this and go over to the campaign. That doesn't work because if we can't do the regular budget, what good is this? So it's got to be over and above. It's got to be more. Lord, how is this going to work? I don't know. With me, my not enough can be more than enough. I don't know how he's going to do it, but he's going to do it. I want to give you guys some good news really quick. God has been so good. I know some of you are excited about this. Others of you not so excited, but my family is leaving in 5 weeks. So we're going to be going on our mission trip, and a number of you have asked me, Pastor John, how are you doing financially? Where are you at in your giving? Where have you been able to get enough? And I'm here to tell you, we have surpassed what we needed to go on this trip. We have surpassed what we needed to go on this trip. And so there are some people who are outside the church who are still considering giving us something. Fantastic. Whatever they give us, we will put towards ministry. But I know for some of you are saying, hey, we wanted to contribute. And I'm here to tell you, my heart is with this church. And I want to see whatever things need to be done here, it needs to be done here. And so if there was something you would give to us, trust me, I know, I appreciate all of you. And some number of you have already given. Many, many, many thanks to you. You made this possible. But anybody else, if you were saying, we wanted to do this, take what you were going to give to us, put it here. This matters, and it really does. I want to come back to a church that barely missed me because of all the cool things that were still happening while we were gone. That's what I want to do. And so hopefully this sticks in your brain, hopefully this really resonates. With Jesus, our not enough can be more than enough. And so here's your final challenge. And there will be slides that will be, if you want to go back and rewatch the sermon, we're going to put slides, we're going to add those in. But for now, they're not up there. So here, just picture the thing, okay? Here it is. Here's your challenge. I want you to face your test. What's your test? Is it marriage? Is it finances? Is it a capital campaign? I want you to face it, look it square in the eye, and then I want you to say your truth. And your truth is, I'm not enough. I don't have what it takes. And then I want you to remember God's truth. God's truth says, with God, all things are possible. There's the test. I don't have what it takes. God's truth. He is more than enough. And therefore, the last thing is, I want you to act in faith. Face your test. Acknowledge your truth, trust God's truth, and then take a step. God, I trust you. I'm stepping out in faith. And here's the closing prayer. God, I offer you my not enough, and I trust you to make it more than enough. Let's pray. God, I thank you for today. I thank you for your word and the challenge that it gives for all of us, and that is to be people of faith. We don't have what it takes. I know that all too well in my own life. But with you, all things are possible. I know this. And if it's according to your purposes, according to your plans, it will work out. And maybe it's not going to be what I think. Maybe it's not going to be the financial windfall that I thought, but it's going to be something else. Maybe it's not going to be the healing that I wanted, but it's going to be something else. But no matter what, when I offer it to you, it will be more than enough, because you are everything is possible with you. And so, God, we just commit this capital campaign to you. We commit this church to you. We commit the tests that we're all facing to you, and we just trust you. You are more than enough. In Jesus' name we pray. And all those in agreement said, amen.